Today I'm honored to be joined by Martin Holstle, who is the CTO of Cloud and AI at Trellix. Martin, welcome.
Thank you for having me.
So Martin, we're here to talk about AI, AI and security. You're obviously a leader in the space, and this week you announced a lot of really exciting things. I want to get started by just sort of like as a kind of like for a frame of reference, just to kind of like get your take on how do you think about basically like AI and AI risk? Like, what are some of the what are some of the risks that the organizations are kind of facing when they're adopting AI in their applications?
Yeah, you could write novels on the overall risk in AI. I think the way that I initially try to explain it is to look at it like application security. And most of the OWASP top 10 for LLMs are really about application security. The difference with AI is that it often creates an opaque layer in between the input and the output. Traditionally, if you look at something like SQL, it's a structured language, and so you can understand if it fits a format. What you find with generative AI is that the prompts themselves don't fit a particular format, so suddenly a lot of the controls that we had in place are no longer relevant, and it's very difficult to figure out what is coming in and what is going out, which means that it's hard to put policy in place.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, and that's exactly what what we're seeing. It's harder to put policy, and I feel like what we're seeing is also there are kind of like a lot of like kind of vulnerabilities like associated like with AI, and those we're kind of seeing now kind of coupled with the fact that with generative AI, AI is we're also getting instructions to the machine, right? And that kind of the risks kind of exponentiate, and and then it's harder to put these controls in place. So speaking a little bit more on the kind of on the benefits now of AI though, I know that you guys have been doing really forward-thinking things with AI, and your organization specifically. So I'm just curious to hear a little bit more about how do you feel like AI has been transforming what you do and your organization?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, fundamentally, it's allowing machines to do the machine stuff and humans to do the human stuff is the way that I think about it. So specifically at Trellix, we just launched something called Trellix Wise, and one of the key components to that is the ability to have AI read the machine level information and make decisions based on what it's been given. And we've never been able to do this before. Really, it's just in the last year where generative AI matured enough to conceptually understand what security is, so it'll understand things like what a password spray attack is. So if you give it information and say, is there anything wrong with this? It'll say, yeah, that was a password spray attack. So we've never had this before. And suddenly, all the investments that we've been making over the years to collect data, to process that data, to even do anomaly detection on that data is now much better because the output from that anomaly detection can now be triaged by the generative AI itself, which has a fundamental concept of security things like password spray attacks. So what this does is automates a ton of the things that humans used to have to do, and it can say, a human needs to look at this, or even as you learn to trust it and see the output, you can say, nope, I agree with this. Every time I want you to go and take this action and move on. And the key thing is that lets humans do the human level stuff. So for our customers, that means that their security areas may be able to talk to key business units and say, what is the worst thing that could happen in your business unit? Build threat models around that, find out what other telemetry they might need, and then put that into the system so that AI can continue to work on that.
So yeah, I mean, like those, I really like kind of like the sort of framing, like kind of let machines do what machines do best, let humans like do it, and it feels like with something like that, it really like can really kind of automate a lot, and basically sounds like it can really empower security teams, right? Like having a tool like this. This is
right.
Sounds amazing. So I guess kind of I'm curious then, you guys like develop like models yourselves, right? And you're using kind of like best in class. Like if for this kind of development, I'm curious, how do you think about open source versus versus kind of like off-the-shelf models? Like, do you feel like is there like kind of like a world where it's like, you feel like it's mainly open source or only open source? You feel like it's kind of like these off-the-shelf models. Like, how do you guys think about it?
Yeah, to me, it's especially interesting because we test all these different models for our use cases to see which ones work the best. And I talked about having AI make security decisions. And what has been most interesting is that the open source models tend to be smaller. And we get essentially the same decisions out of smaller models, but they're much less descriptive in why they made that decision. So if they have fewer parameters, they'll have fewer tools to explain the decision that they made. And we're taking a lot of data, giving it a good grounding so it makes good decisions, and that's why we're able to use most models to make these decisions. But from a customer's perspective, they need to understand why the AI made its decision. And so for that, we're finding that the closed source models are larger and will have better descriptions for why they gave that information. But at the same time, the smaller models can be run in very different places for very different costs,
Right.
and they can make the same decisions. So I think it's going to be very interesting over the next year or so to see the decision making that occurs at a corporate level decide, do we want to go this route, or do we want to go this route, or which situations call for which model. On the threat actor side, since we're in security, I think it's a very interesting discussion around open versus closed. And I think for me, it's an interesting discussion, but it's largely academic, because if there's even one decent open source model, that means that threat actors can use that. And so for me, it's kind of a binary question. Are there controls in place that would prevent a threat actor from using this for evil purposes? And the answer is no. Threat actors are using this today all the time, and that ship has sailed. That's a done deal. And interestingly, we've also found that even for the closed source models, it's not particularly difficult to get around the policies that they have in place. So threat actors can use the closed source models just like the open source models. So I think from the debate about what should be published like that and what attackers can use, I think that's probably a moot point right now. I think the larger question around open versus closed is probably more around copyrights and the source data that's used. I know there's a number of lawsuits right now pending on that. I think that is probably going to be the larger discussion long term versus is it dangerous or not to have these models open or closed.
I agree. So I really like kind of how you're saying that that it's an academic discussion, because the bad actors already have access to basically state-of-the-art models, and they can use them. We can just we're better off like kind of assuming that is the case, right? And now kind of like building protection, given that we're in kind of like a similar boat where we're constantly kind of in debate about like, okay, there new attack technique, new method, right? New algorithmic approach for like attacking models. Like, do we let the world know? Do we publish it or not? And I feel like we're a lot of times we're kind of we feel the same, right? It's we need to assume that like the threat actors like have access to these kinds of techniques, and we're better off in making them being open about it, so the larger community can use it and enjoy and kind of learn how to defend itself from that. So with that, right, and given that you guys are kind of well aware of like kind of threat actors like in the space, how does your team think about AI security? So obviously you guys are using, you guys are using state-of-the-art models. You're doing fine-tuning. Model integrity is important for you. There's a lot of kind of like you're accessing a lot of data. So how do you think about AI security?
So at a high level, I think of it similar to how I think about cloud security, in that one of the most important firewalls you have in cloud security is an account ID. As in, what's running in one account should be partitioned from what's running in another account. And there's organizations that have many accounts, one for each project, et cetera, depending on your cloud provider, what means account. And I think some of that partitioning can apply in the AI space as well. And what I mean by that is when you're saying, I'm going to execute this prompt, there needs to be full understanding of what that LLM has access to through APIs at that time and whether or not it's authorized. So some of that is simple RBAC, but as I mentioned earlier, what I find is that the implementation of the LLM often confuses architecture teams and development teams, and suddenly they forget their application security 101, and they forget that you need to have this authenticated control, and that you can't trust the input that's coming in. Recently, one of the major office providers has had a very serious vulnerability where anything that would come in over an email, if you ask a question of that email, it would consider the content of the email to be part of the prompt. So it was completely untrusted input, and that meant you got completely untrusted output. So this is a serious vulnerability.
So kind of like prompt injection.
Every
potential.
email is a prompt injection is what it ends up as. And that is one of the worst things that can possibly happen. So this is a big deal. People need to understand that as these kinds of uses of AI come out, different organizations have different levels of maturity and understanding how they can implement these things. And if they mix their controls, they can cause serious vulnerabilities.
Amazing. Yeah, could not agree more. Yeah, I wasn't aware of that case. I think that's a really interesting one, but a huge vulnerability.
Yeah.
So I guess kind of maybe just to conclude, you know, I'm sure there are a lot of people watching. I think there are a lot of people who are you know, sort of thinking about you know, securing AI in their own organization. And you know, trying to, like, as on the one hand, they're kind of like racing to, you know, to kind of like adopt AI and kind of like, you know, and transform, you know, the organization like into like kind of an AI first organization, but at the same time, right, they're aware of the, you know, all the, you know, the potential vulnerabilities, the various like security issues. What would you recommend to you know, someone who's like leading an organization, someone who's maybe responsible for the security of the organization, who's now looking to like incorporate, you know, adopt AI?
So at the very beginning, you have to at least itemize what AI is being used. So one of the worst things that can happen is different places using different AIs in different ways and not talking to each other and not finding out best practices and things that you need to do for security for it. So if you're a CIO or a CISO, one of the top things you need to do is not restrict the usage of it, but at least document the usage of it. If you try to restrict it, you'll get shadow IT. People will work around it because they're trying to be productive. So you want to enable that productivity, but you need to also understand where all these things are, what projects are using it, and then implement best practices. So at Trellix, we have an AI center of excellence that we use to provide those best practices.
That makes a lot of sense. Yeah, I think, and we're seeing that as well. I feel like kind of policy first, right? Itemizing kind of what, you know, what AI is used for and kind of like the access that it has, and then, you know, following policy. Then that's the only way where you can like actually figure out like what is the right like implementation of security practices, right, for AI. So yeah, I think that's very good advice. Well, Martin, thank you so much for, you know, for taking the time to chat. Really appreciate it. And yeah, very, very, you know, excited and looking forward to seeing like what you guys continue on doing at Trellix. It's really, you know, mind blowing. So.
Thank you. It's been great. Thanks for having me.
Thank you.